in our daily life. If you want to take on a position of power at your company, if you want to be disciplined in your day and write books and record podcasts or go to the gym, whatever it might be, and if you're doing that without any compassion for anyone that you encounter on the way, those pursuits are completely meaningless. Luke stands over his father on the Death Star, saber raised, breathing heavy, angry, ready to strike, but choosing not to. Why was Luke, a half-trained farm boy, able to destroy the evil Sith when the entire Jedi Order, with centuries of wisdom, could not? Now you might ask, well, what does this have to do with Stoicism? And I'm going to make an interesting parallel here. Star Wars is, well, it is a very popular movie series, to say the least. But it actually has a lot of parallels with philosophy. There is the Jedi philosophy. And ultimately, I think there's a lot of parallels to Stoicism. And the one I want to focus on in particular here is that of the use of emotions, and particularly compassion. Stoics often get misconstrued as being emotionless rocks. And it's no surprise, because if you look Stoicism up in the dictionary, you'll see two definitions. You'll see the ancient philosophy of Stoicism, and then you'll see another one which means, not showing emotions, being a rock. And some scholars, most scholars, will distinguish little s Stoicism as being the emotionlessness, and big S Stoicism as being the philosophy. But it doesn't change the fact that if you were to go out and maybe talk about Stoicism with someone who's not familiar with the philosophy, even people who are beginners to intermediates to the philosophy, they may think that it is essentially not engaging in your emotions. And that is not true. And we know that, I know that, you know that, because we are practicing Stoics, right? But it is nevertheless something that is a misunderstanding with the philosophy. Now, let's pivot to Star Wars. Put on your nerd caps, put on your visors, draw your lightsabers. And I'm going to assume for this episode that you are somewhat familiar with the philosophy of the Jedi, and at least that you've watched the movies. So, let's talk about the Jedi's failure. In the early movies, the prequel era, for those nerds out there, the Jedi really lost their way, in the same way that you see some Stoics losing their way today. They essentially turned what was virtue into dogma. They suppressed emotion instead of mastering it. They fought for control instead of peace. And this is a very important distinction, because in any philosophy, in any religion, including that of the Jedi and of Stoics, you can actually have the philosophy itself form into a dogma. And when it becomes a dogma, it becomes a very bad thing, because all of a sudden you have people who are not really thinking for themselves. And so it's a very big issue. You see that in, again, everything in Christianity, and you do see it in Stoicism. You do see people who are a part of groups, social groups, and they are essentially dogmatic about the philosophy. They're not true Stoics. Now, they're close, but they're missing elements to it because of the dogma. So, like the Jedi, they suppressed emotions instead of mastering them, and they fought for control instead of peace. And there's a quote from Yoda, the wise Yoda, who is the wisest Jedi, who says to Anakin Skywalker, who of course later becomes Darth Vader, he says, "Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose." That was his advice to a person who is struggling with fear of the loss of his wife. He fears that his wife is going to die in childbirth, and he's afraid. And so he talks to Yoda, and this is what Yoda tells him. Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. Now, here's the interesting thing about this. You can take that line, and you can actually call that Stoic. In fact, you might even say that that's an Epictetus idea. Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose, meaning don't become attached to people, to things. So it's technically correct from the Jedi perspective and from the Stoic perspective. It's technically correct, but there's a flaw here in this advice. And the flaw is that it's emotionally sterile. You see, Anakin is a human being. He's a person, and he's struggling, and he has fear. And Yoda just basically tells him, well, just train yourself to let go of it, man. Just let go of it. And though that might be the answer, that doesn't address the underlying issue of, well, this is a real emotion. How do I work through this? How do I not suppress this, but deal with it in a healthy way? And so what happens is that their fear of emotion, the fear of emotion creates emotional blindness. They couldn't understand Anakin's suffering, and so they ended up losing him. To give you a modern example, which is not really modern, but it's one you'll understand. If someone comes to you, a friend, and they tell you, my father just died. He just passed away. And they're upset. Of course, they're going to be upset. And you, as the Stoic, you look at your friend and you tell them, well, the Stoics say death is indifferent. And, you shouldn't become attached to people, even your father. You have no control over when they die. Do you really think that's the Stoic response? In some weird way, in some paradoxical way, in some sense, explaining Stoicism to a person suffering is not always the Stoic response. In the same way, Yoda explaining to Anakin, you have to train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. That's not really the most compassionate response. It's not the most Jedi response. And the reason is because you are not giving enough credit to the emotional weight of of what that person is bearing. You have no compassion for them. And so what a Stoic response should actually look like in that situation where a friend comes to you and they have their father who recently passed away and they're upset is really just to be there, to listen to them genuinely, to put your phone away, turn your damn phone off. Just sit with them. Have a meal with them. Listen to them. Console them. It's not to whip them when they're at their lowest point and remind them of how death is indifferent and that their father is outside of their control. No, that's not a Stoic response. The key there is acknowledging and seeing their emotional state. Not playing into it, but being a witness to it. being a human being, in other words, understanding their suffering. Hey there. Let me thank you for being a listener to this ad-free podcast. If you enjoy the podcast, there are a few things you can do to help me out. A 5-star review on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this really does help, and it's free. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter or Patreon. Substack free gets each episode emailed to you along with the transcripts in the form of an article. You'll also get access to my live talks, followed by a Q&A afterward. Substack Premium supporters and my patrons on Patreon get access to the recordings and a brief article of those Q&A sessions, access to full episodes of the Paradoxically Speaking podcast, my Steps to Success interview series, Stoic meditations, and much more. Links to Substack and Patreon can be found in the show notes. And so then we go to Luke Skywalker. And let's have a look at how he was raised. Unlike every other Jedi in the Jedi Temple, he wasn't raised in a temple. He wasn't stripped from his family. He wasn't trained from a young age. He was raised on a farm. He had a normal life. He had love in his life. He had loss. He lost his aunt and uncle. But he did have family. He had an aunt and uncle for a very long time. And he felt the Force, the Logos, as something living, not something institutional. This is very interesting because you have these circles of Stoicism today, these groups of Stoicism. You even have certificates of Stoicism now you can get. But that doesn't make you a Stoic. That doesn't make you a Stoic. What makes you a Stoic is living the principles of Stoicism. And so you can, very oddly, you can be a better Stoic than someone who is a quote-quote certified Stoic, even if you don't even know what the word Stoic means, if you're living the principles. And so Luke, standing above his father, ready to strike, ready to kill him, but then choosing not to, and then stating instead, I am a father like my father before me. That isn't him engaging in the institution of Jediism. This isn't him following the dogma of the Jedi Order. This is him saying, I know what feels good. I know what's right. I know what's good in this moment. It's courage and strength coupled with compassion. It's discipline with humanity. And so Luke, in that moment, he didn't win because he dominated, like the Jedi before them tried to do. They tried to dominate the Sith. They tried to kill the Sith. They tried to meet power with power. In fact, Yoda, Obi-Wan, to Luke, they were advising him, you have to face Vader. You have to kill Vader. That's your test. That proves that you are a Jedi. But for Luke, it was something different. For Luke, it was compassion. It was, this is my father, and I can't kill him. How can I kill him? I can be strong. I can be courageous. I can win the fight. I can be disciplined. But if I'm not compassionate, if I'm not humane, if I don't refuse to hate, then what makes me any different from the Sith? Now, the Stoics have this idea, philanthropia, which means compassion. And compassion is, again, against popular belief, compassion is central to Stoic ethics. Marcus Aurelius said, we were made for cooperation, like hands or feet. Compassion is central to Stoic ethics. The Stoic doesn't kill emotion. They don't suppress it. But they direct it. They acknowledge it. They honor it in a sense. Luke's compassion transformed Anakin or Darth Vader where logic and fear had failed. You see, the Jedi tried to kill the Sith again, and Luke didn't kill them. He healed one. Now, note the weird paradox here, because the Jedi sought to defeat the dark side. Luke, on the other hand, he transcended the conflict by embodying love for his father. And he was only able to do that because he knew and understood what it actually meant to be virtuous. Not what the Jedi said, not what the Sith said, not what Yoda told him, not what Obi-Wan told him, but what he felt through the living force. So what are the lessons here for us as Stoics? Well, power and discipline are completely meaningless without compassion. The Jedi lost their way. They were focused on power, retaining it, gaining it when they lost it. And they were disciplined. They were super disciplined. They trained kids from a young age to become powerful Jedi. But if you don't add in compassion, it's completely meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. In our daily life, if you want to take on a position of power at your company, if you want to be disciplined in your day and write books and record podcasts or go to the gym, whatever it might be, and if you're doing that without any compassion for anyone that you encounter on the way, those pursuits are completely meaningless. Again, compassion is central to Stoic ethics. True Stoic virtue is feeling deeply, but acting rightly. And I always find it interesting when I encounter people who try and convince me that Stoics suppress or repress emotions, because I can tell you, for me personally, my Stoic journey has been not suppressing emotions. It hasn't been reducing emotions. I have felt more deeply than I ever have the further along I get. So it's not about repressing, it's not about suppressing, it's about feeling the emotions deeply, but acting rightly despite what you're feeling. And a lot of people ignore the feeling deeply part, and they think you can just go to the acting rightly. And I don't think that's true. I don't think you can actually do that. So Luke's example teaches us, feel everything. Feel the love, feel the compassion, feel the anger sometimes, feel the hate. Because sometimes you can't help but feel it. Sometimes it's out of your control. But ultimately, let reason steer your decisions. Act with integrity, even when it costs you. Luke almost died by throwing down his saber. But he acted with integrity anyway. And refuse to mirror evil, even when it's justified. Be very careful when fighting evil that you don't become evil. Be careful that you don't live by the eye for an eye ethos. So let's tie it all together. The Jedi tried to destroy darkness. Luke succeeded by bringing light into it. Imagine how foolish it would be to look out into the night sky and try and destroy the darkness. Whereas Luke grabbed a flashlight, didn't try and destroy the darkness, but rather tried to just bring some light into it. Remember that compassion isn't weakness. If there's one thing I can hope that you take away from this episode, it's that compassion is, again, central to Stoic ethics. Compassion is courage under full awareness of pain, vulnerability. And let me end with a line from Yoda's Ghost. The greatest teacher failure is. Yoda's final lesson, if you watch episodes 1 through 9, Yoda's final lesson after all of this journey was learning what Luke already knew. And that is, no matter how powerful and how disciplined you are as a Jedi, as a Stoic, without integrating compassion, all of that means absolutely nothing. Luke was the last Jedi, and the first truly Stoic one.